He was the most feared gangster in Macau, a man who turned a quiet gambling city into his own criminal kingdom. From street thug to triad boss, Wan Kwok Koi, better known as Broken Tooth, ruled with violence, charm, and raw ambition. His rise was brutal, his fall dramatic, and his comeback unlike anything the underworld had seen. This is the true story of how one man became a legend in the shadows of Asia's casino empire. Watch until the end. You won't believe how it all played out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real crime stories. Wan Kwok Koi was born in 1955 in Macau, a small city known for gambling, cheap thrills, and its uneasy mix of Chinese tradition and Portuguese rule. Back then, Macau wasn't the glossy casino capital it is today. It was a rough, crime-ridden port city with crooked cops, desperate families, and streets that didn't offer many chances to do things the clean way. Wan grew up in one of the poorest parts of the city, packed into a rundown apartment with his family. His father was mostly absent, and his mother worked long hours just to keep food on the table. The future triad boss spent his early years watching loan sharks, gangsters, and gamblers rule the alleys. These men had power, money, and swagger. Wan paid attention. He was a tough kid. Small but mean, he had a reputation for throwing punches before talking. School didn't interest him much, and by his teenage years he was already hanging around with local street crews. He ran errands for older thugs, collected debts, and learned how to make himself useful in the underworld. The streets gave him everything he couldn't get at home: respect, purpose, and a clear ladder to climb. By the late 1970s, Wan joined the 14K Triad, one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in the region. The 14K started in mainland China but spread to Hong Kong and Macau like wildfire. They dealt in gambling, smuggling, extortion, drugs, and just about anything else that made money. In Macau, where the government turned a blind eye and the casinos needed someone to keep order, triads thrived. Wan wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was ambitious, cold, and smart. He watched how things worked, made friends in low places, and slowly moved up the ranks. He earned his nickname, Broken Tooth, after losing one of his front teeth in a street fight. The name stuck, and it soon became feared across Macau. By the early 1980s, he was already making money running illegal casinos and loan sharking operations. He had soldiers under him, a network of loyal enforcers, and a growing list of enemies. What set Wan apart wasn't just his appetite for violence, it was his ability to mix brutality with business sense. He understood how to shake someone down without ruining them. He knew when to act and when to wait. During this time, Macau was still under Portuguese control. The police were underpaid and often on the take. That worked in Wan's favor. He started building relationships with corrupt officers, slipping them envelopes full of cash in exchange for information or protection. At the same time, he made sure the neighborhoods under his control stayed orderly. Street crime was kept in check. Gambling dens paid their dues, and disputes were handled quickly. To many locals, he was a necessary evil, someone who kept the city from slipping into complete chaos. By the end of the 1980s, Wan had built a reputation as one of the most powerful men in Macau's underworld. He wasn't just a street boss anymore. He had money in real estate, interests in nightclubs, and silent stakes in local casinos. His face started showing up in public more often, usually behind a pair of dark sunglasses and an expensive suit. He drove luxury cars, surrounded himself with bodyguards, and acted more like a businessman than a gangster. But everyone knew what he really was. His enemies knew it too. Power in the triad world never stays unchallenged for long. Other gangs saw his rise as a threat. Fights broke out in the back alleys of the city. Bodies started turning up near docks and gambling houses. Juan responded with precision. He didn't send messages, he made examples. Rivals were found beaten, burned, or just gone. His reputation for violence was matched only by his control. People were scared to cross him, and that's exactly how he liked it. Still, he didn't hide in the shadows. In fact, Juan seemed to enjoy the attention. He let the legend grow. Stories about him spread like wildfire, especially in Macau's back streets and gaming parlors. He was said to be untouchable, the king of the city's dark side. For many young men trying to escape poverty, he was something like a role model. He had come from the same streets and made it big. He didn't bow to anyone, not the police, not politicians, not rival bosses. At the same time, his connections were getting stronger and more dangerous. He started forming alliances with other triad leaders in Hong Kong and even reached across into mainland China. His network was growing, and so was the attention he attracted. Some in law enforcement began to see him as more than a local gangster. They saw a rising criminal empire, one that could threaten the entire region's stability. But in the world he lived in, nothing was stable for long. Power was always shifting, and enemies were always watching. Juan Quoc Coi was climbing high, but even then the cracks were starting to show. His flashy lifestyle, public profile, and increasing influence were drawing too much heat. For now, he remained in control, but the years ahead would test everything he had built, and not everyone around him would survive the storm. By the early 1990s, Juan Quoc Coi was no longer just a powerful gangster. He was the gangster in Macau. Everyone knew his name. Cops, casino bosses, rival triads, even school kids. People called him Broken Tooth, and the name carried weight. His empire stretched across Macau's gambling scene, with his fingers in every profitable corner of the city. He had his own private army, full of loyal men who followed orders without hesitation. If a rival showed up, they disappeared. If someone failed to pay their debt, they paid another way. Juan ran things his own way, and for a while, no one dared to stop him. The early 90s were a gold rush for criminals like him. Macau was booming. Tourists came in from Hong Kong and mainland China with pockets full of cash. Gambling was legal, but that didn't mean it was clean. Loan sharks roamed the casino floors, collecting interest on the hour. Triads operated VIP rooms, ran their own security, and made sure the house always won. In that world, Juan wasn't hiding. He was the one setting the rules. He took over more gambling dens and began controlling parts of the junket business, which brought in high rollers and funneled millions into the casinos. He made deals with casino operators behind closed doors, offering protection and services they couldn't refuse. The money kept flowing, and so did the power. Juan lived like a king. He wore custom suits, stayed in penthouses, and traveled with a full security team. People whispered that he was more powerful than the police, and they weren't entirely wrong. What made him even more dangerous was how much he enjoyed the spotlight. Unlike most triad bosses who preferred to stay in the shadows, Juan leaned into his image. He knew the fear he caused, and he used it. He started showing up at public events, even rubbing shoulders with businessmen and politicians. Then, in a move that shocked even his own men, he decided to make a movie about himself. He bankrolled a film that was essentially a tribute to his own rise through the criminal underworld. It was part ego trip, part warning to anyone thinking of stepping out of line. He wasn't afraid of being seen. He wanted people to know who ran Macau, but power always comes with enemies. Rival triads were fed up with his dominance. Some wanted a piece of his business. Others just wanted him gone. The streets grew tense. Gunfights broke out in daylight. Car bombs exploded outside gambling houses. The turf war escalated fast, and innocent people started getting caught in the crossfire. Tourists were scared. Casino owners were nervous. Even the Portuguese government, which had mostly turned a blind eye for years, started to worry. Juan responded the only way he knew how, by doubling down. He sent his men to crack skulls, burn down properties, and send a clear message. Macau was his and he wasn't giving it up. But the more violence erupted, the more pressure came down on the government to do something. With the 1999 handover to China fast approaching, Portuguese authorities knew they had to clean up the city, or at least make it look like they were trying. In May 1998, Juan finally pushed too far. His gang was linked to the attempted car bombing of a top anti-corruption official, and that was the last straw. A massive police operation was launched to take him down. He had always believed he was untouchable. That belief shattered when dozens of officers stormed his luxury office and arrested him. It was a public takedown designed to humiliate him. For the first time in years, Broken Tooth was behind bars. His arrest made international headlines. The once feared triad boss was dragged through the court system, facing charges that ranged from loan sharking and criminal association to attempted murder. During the trial, prosecutors painted him as the ruthless kingpin behind Macau's bloodiest years. Witnesses were terrified to testify, and security around the courthouse was tight. But in the end, the case stuck. Juan was sentenced to over a decade in prison, and just like that, his reign was over. His fall was dramatic. The man who once ran the city's criminal empire now spent his days in a small cell, far from the neon lights of the casinos he once controlled. Some said it was the end of an era. Others weren't so sure. Even in prison, rumors swirled that he was still pulling strings. His name carried enough weight to keep certain operations alive, even if he wasn't the one giving direct orders anymore. Macau began to change after his arrest. With the handover to China just months away, authorities cleaned up the streets and cracked down on the triads. The violence faded. New casino bosses came in, backed by corporations instead of crime lords. But the shadow of Broken Tooth lingered. People remembered the chaos, the fear, the way one man had turned a small city into his own kingdom. Even behind bars, Juan's legend only grew. Younger gangsters spoke about him like a myth, a symbol of how far someone from nothing could rise. His enemies breathed easier, but they didn't forget. Everyone knew that someone like Juan Kwok Koi never really disappeared. He was waiting, watching, and someday, they believed, he'd be back. Juan Kwok Koi walked out of prison in December 2012 after serving nearly 14 years. He was older, heavier, and visibly worn from the years behind bars. But the moment he stepped outside, people knew he hadn't lost the fire in his eyes. He didn't come back quietly. The press was there, so were old allies. And while some expected him to disappear into retirement, maybe even leave the underworld behind, Juan had other plans. He didn't want to go back to the old game. He wanted to rewrite it entirely. Macau had changed during his time inside. The casinos were bigger, richer, and cleaner, or at least better at hiding their dirty business. The triads were still around, but they were quieter, more businesslike, less violent. China had taken over, and with that came a new level of control. Juan returned to a city that barely resembled the one he once ruled. But he hadn't spent all those years in prison sulking. He'd been thinking, watching, planning. He knew that old-school gangsterism was out. What he needed now was a new identity. He started calling himself a businessman. He dressed the part, gave polite interviews, and talked about peace, patriotism, and Chinese unity. He formed a company that promised to promote Chinese culture and national pride, naming it the China Hung Mun Culture Association. It sounded innocent enough, even noble, but those who knew his history saw through it. Hung Mun was the name of a secret society with centuries of underground ties. This wasn't just about culture, it was about power. Wan began showing up at political conferences and business expos across Asia. He gave speeches about economic cooperation and moral values. He posed for photos with former officials, entrepreneurs, and other big names. He launched investment schemes in Cambodia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. He even dipped his toe into the world of cryptocurrency, promoting a so-called patriotic digital coin aimed at Chinese investors. People started whispering again. Was this just a cover for a new empire? Was Broken Tooth rebuilding, using suits and slogans instead of fists and guns? Governments started to pay attention. Reports surfaced that his business projects were shady, possibly linked to fraud, money laundering, or worse. The U.S. Treasury Department put him on a sanctions list in 2020, accusing him of trying to use Chinese nationalism to mask organized crime activity. Cambodia and the Philippines began pushing back, closing down his offices and kicking out his associates. But Wan didn't blink. He denied everything, insisting he was just a businessman trying to help overseas Chinese communities stay connected to their roots. At home, though, opinions were divided. Some saw him as a washed-up gangster trying to stay relevant. Others believed he had truly evolved, trading bloodshed for boardrooms. But for those who had lived through the chaos of the 90s, it was hard to forget who he had been. They remembered the bombings, the shootings, the fear. They remembered what Macau looked like when Broken Tooth was in charge. No matter how sharp his suit was, that memory didn't fade. Wan wasn't exactly laying low either. He made public appearances with celebrities and influencers. He attended lavish banquets and posted updates on social media. He spoke with the confidence of someone who still believed he had an audience. And maybe he did. Younger generations of Triad members looked at him like a legend, a man who had taken on governments and lived to tell the tale. In their eyes, he wasn't just history, he was the blueprint. Still, it wasn't the same. The world had changed. Technology made everything traceable. Governments cooperated more closely than ever to crack down on organized crime. Surveillance, financial regulations, and international pressure closed off many of the paths he had once walked so easily. And while his return had stirred the waters, it hadn't created the wave he probably hoped for. But Wan wasn't someone who needed to be at the center of the storm to feel powerful. Even in the background, his influence lingered. People who once worked for him now ran legitimate businesses. Some still moved in the gray areas, taking advantage of old connections and loyalties. In some ways, Wan didn't need to rebuild his empire. He had already planted the seeds before he ever went to prison. He was now watching them grow. The last few years saw him staying active but careful. He made fewer bold claims. His business efforts became more vague, more symbolic. Some say he was testing the waters. Others think he was quietly fading, protecting what little remained of his legacy. But the name Broken Tooth still carried weight. It reminded people of a different time, a darker time. And even if he wasn't calling shots the way he used to, nobody wanted to be the one to test if he still could. In the end, Wan Kuo Koi became something few gangsters ever managed to become. An icon. Not a hero, not a martyr, but a living symbol of a world that both fascinated and terrified people. His life became a story passed around gambling tables and back alleys, told with a mix of fear, respect, and disbelief. And whether or not he ever truly let go of that life, one thing remained clear. Broken Tooth never really left the game. He just changed how he played it. Broken Tooth's journey from gangster to businessman to living myth is a tale you only see in movies. Except this one's real. He came from nothing, controlled everything, and walked away still holding influence. Whether you see him as a criminal mastermind or a relic of a darker time, one thing's certain. His legacy still haunts Macau's neon-lit streets. If you found this story as wild as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got more insane true crime stories you won't hear anywhere else. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.